Welcome back to another episode of the Sunday Stash, here with episode number 12. There's a lot of things that I actually wanted to cover this week, but I actually kind of wanted to take a step back after having done the episode from 2 weeks ago, episode 11, and I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into something that I had covered in that episode, which was the Times People of the Year. I didn't really go into their history or anything like that, or really talk much about the selection of that in their selection of Biden and Harris. I didn't actually do an episode this past week, which was the weekend before Christmas. I was out of town visiting my girlfriend. I didn't actually have any of my equipment or anything like that, so I ended up saving it for now. I got a decent amount of information because I'm going to kind of cover most of the Times People of the Year that have happened so far. I still, personally, my opinion, still don't agree with Time selecting Biden and Harris. In the past, they have chosen multiple people, so I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't agree with the fact that they chose the two particular people. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fact that I'm not a fan of them. It has more to do with what's going on in 2020 and everything, but I'll get into that here in a little bit, and I got some things to say later on about that. So anyway, Time Magazine, I got its start back on March 3rd of 1923 in New York. Currently, it's owned by Mark and Lynn Benioff. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they bought it in 2018 and paid $190 million for it. It's not important, but I guess something to mention. The Mark Benioff guy, he has a net worth of almost $10 billion. He's the founder and CEO of Salesforce, which I'll be honest with you, I'm not really 100% sure what that company does. I just know that that's what he does. Based on what I was able to find and looking over his career and him, he's actually a very giving person, huge philanthropist. So it seems as though the dude is a very good person. Currently, the managing editor is a guy named Edward Felsenthal, and I think that is I don't know if that's the right pronunciation or not. And he's held that position since 2018, and he first joined Time in 2013 as a digital managing editor. He started his career at the Wall Street Journal, and then later was the first executive editor of the Daily Beast. When you go in and you check the political bias chart and of the Daily Beast, you see that it's left-leaning, and it is in the same category as CNN, or CNN Opinion, I should say, CNN Opinion. So I would definitely say that it is, the Daily Beast is left-leaning. I would also say that if he worked there and he was a managing editor of the Daily Beast, that he is also likely more left-leaning. You go to his Twitter page, and you kind of get an idea and get the feel that he is a Biden supporter. So I would say that it's definitely safe to say that the managing editor of Time currently is a Democrat, a liberal. He would fit into that category. The reason I mention this, he chose, since he is the managing editor, and he has influence, that Biden and Harris were chosen more because of who they are as opposed to what they've done. With that being said, if you go over to Time and their website and look back to the selection of this, and you see that the Time took a reader's poll and looked to see who they thought the Times Person of the Year would be, and It turns out that it wasn't Biden and Harris. The actual winner of the readers poll was the frontline workers, the frontline healthcare workers. I think that's what it was. Like I said, I think they were chosen because Biden had been elected president, and Harris is there along with her for inclusiveness in today's world. Realistically, because of being elected president, every year since Bush in 2000, they've followed the pattern of selecting the president that was elected. So in 2000, Bush. 2004, they got Bush again. Obama was selected in 2008 and in 2012. Trump was selected in 2016. So realistically, I'm not surprised that they ended up choosing what they chose based on precedent. I personally think that they should have chosen something a little bit different this year, only because of what we're going through and what's going on. So I'll kind of jump into it a little bit. When you travel over to Wikipedia, I know some people don't think that Wikipedia is the best thing to have, but if you go over to Wikipedia, and it gives you a good overview of everything that happened with time and everything like that, you get to kind of look at their initial selection process and everything like that. So they began selecting the person of the year in 1927, and they have chosen the president as the person of the year for each president, with the exception of Calvin Coolidge. He was president from 1923 to 1929, so they hadn't really set the precedent yet for selecting the president. Herbert Hoover had served from 1929 to 1933, so I would say it's kind of the same there, where they had not really set the precedent for selecting the president of the United States as the person of the year to that point. So I think the two of those you kind of give a pass to. And the only president that was not chosen after time had began choosing presidents was Gerald Ford, in which his presidency was odd since he was not even elected as vice president. Agnew resigned, and he was chosen as the vice president for Nixon, and then he took over as president when Nixon resigned in the wake of the Watergate scandal. So Ford was definitely in a weird situation with all of that. So I kind of understand where they're coming from there and not choosing Ford. The first president that was chosen was Franklin D. Roosevelt. And I'm not going to cover every single person of the year. I am going to skip a few of them completely, and then some of them I'm only going to mention briefly. Many of these people have accomplished much more than what they were given credit for in this. So they've accomplished a lot more in their lives than what they were given credit for in the particular year that they were chosen. There are some that I am going to go into a little bit more detail because I found them interesting while researching them and found their impact a little bit more interesting than others. And maybe they might not be somebody that everyone knows, or might not be something that everybody knows. And that does not mean that I think their impact on the world is lesser or greater than any other person on the list. I will gloss over some people that made huge impacts on the world, and possibly not mention others. There are some people that were runners up that and not selected by time that were also influential, and I don't intend on mentioning any of them either. I didn't go into runners up or anything like that other than the runners up for 2020, which I'll get to at the end. So anyway, to start this off, I think it's good to understand the criteria that Time uses to select their person/people of the year. The person of the year is not an honor, but instead should be a distinction applied to the newsmaker who influenced the world events for better or worse. That's something important to note as you go through. So 1927, first year that they ever selected a person of the year. Charles Lindbergh He is the first person to fly a plane nonstop over the Atlantic Ocean. And actually, one of the things that I had seen about that one was he actually had not even been big in the news until that happened. So he was a little bit of a controversial choice because he played no role in what had happened other than he did that in 1927. 1928, Walter Chrysler, he started building the Chrysler Tower in New York, which is a pretty iconic building for the New York skyline. 1929, Owen D. Young, he led the committee that developed the payment plan for Germany to pay reparations from World War I. 1930, which is Gandhi, he led the Salt March and Indian protesting of the British taxation of of Britain's salt monopoly. And obviously that's something in 1930. Gandhi has such a huge influence in life other than just 1930. So that's something to keep in mind, that he was selected as Person of the Year, but his influence goes far beyond just 1930. 1932, I skipped 1931. That was Pierre Laval, not somebody that I felt was important to really notice, mention in my opinion. It's just what it is. So anyway, skip it. 1932. Franklin Roosevelt, first president ever selected as it. He was also elected in 1934 and 1941. He served 12 years as president. And that's something that I actually kind of thought maybe a lot of people wouldn't have known offhand, only because after he died, the 22nd Amendment was added that limited presidents to only being able to serve 2 terms. Let's see. So he was selected in 34. 1936, this was another one that I felt was pretty interesting. Wallis Simpson. She is... So King Edward VIII, he gave up his throne to marry her, which then King George VI took over, and his daughter is the current Queen of England. Although, it is mainly just a figurehead and doesn't really play a role in government in the United Kingdom, she took the crown at about age 26 and has been queen ever since. So it actually kind of sucks for her son. So whenever she does pass away, he won't really be able to be king for very long because she served as queen for such a long time. So that right there, this King Edward VIII gave up the crown, gave up the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. So I assume she got this because of disrupting the royal line. So I thought that was pretty interesting to note there. The next 2 years, in my opinion, they don't really, I guess, age too well because of the 2 people that have been selected. But this is where it's important to keep in mind the reason, that Time does their selection. To remember that it's not an honor. So anyway, 1938. They selected Adolf Hitler. At his selection as the Person of the Year, Hitler had not begun the Holocaust at that point. But as the Chancellor of Germany, he invaded Czechoslovakia and Austria in 1938, and then the following year, 1939, he had invaded Poland. So the following year in 1939, none other than Joseph Stalin was selected as the Times Person of the Year. He was the leader of the Soviet Union and had ordered the Red Army to invade Poland after Germany had invaded Poland. So Stalin ordered the Red Army to invade Eastern Poland after Germany had invaded Western Poland. That is essentially what began World War II. And this was actually not the only time Stalin was selected as Times Person of the Year. I am going to gloss over Winston Churchill. I know he's played an important role, but I'm going to gloss over it just because. 1941, Roosevelt had been chosen again for his role in World War II, and he was the president during the attack on Pearl Harbor, and then he declared war on Japan after the attack. 1942, Joseph Stalin was selected again for his role in the Battle of Stalingrad, which stopped Germany from pushing further into the Soviet Union, which is actually pretty important in the timeline of history. I think that this choice was made regardless of the human rights abuses that Stalin oversaw. I think that the choice of Stalin is in bad taste, since he is responsible for the death of millions of people. I found a wide range of numbers. Some people list the number of deaths linked to Stalin around 20 million, but today I think the numbers have been kind of settled around 6 to 8 million people that he's been responsible for, and it's over the span of a long time that he's responsible for that many deaths. So it is a lot of people. I don't necessarily agree with that selection of Stalin and Hitler, but when you think about the reason why Time is coming out and saying that they choose the people that they choose, it is people that have done important things in the world, and when you look at it in that regard, it is a controversial choice, but it makes sense at the time. 1943, George Marshall was selected for advising the president during World War II. 1944, Dwight D. Eisenhower, he was a 5-star general during World War II and responsible for the execution of Operation Overlord, which was the Battle of Normandy, and which allowed the Allied powers to gain a foothold in Western Europe and basically stopped the Soviet Union from taking over all of Europe. 1945, Harry S. Truman, he took over as president after Roosevelt had died, and then made the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan, which led to the surrender of Japan and subsequent end of World War II. 1947, George Marshall was selected again for writing the Marshall Plan, which was used by the U.S. to help Western Europe recover from World War II. It was pretty much the plan that was trying to help, plan by the U.S. to stop the spread of communism, essentially. 1948, Truman was selected again for being elected president, which was pretty surprising, evidently, because Dewey was actually, from what I've read, everyone thought that Dewey was going to end up winning. So, 1949, Winston Churchill. I didn't actually do much research into Churchill, so he just got selected in 49. 1950, it was the American fighting man. It was the American soldiers that were fighting in the Korean War. 1951, this was Mohammed, I'm not going to pronounce the name correctly, Mossadegh. I think that's probably completely wrong. Anyway, he was elected as the Prime Minister of Iran in 1951, and in the same year, he nationalized the Iranian oil industry, which had been built by the British through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Today, that company is known as BP. And this is a man that I actually want to do some more research into, because based on what I've read, he seems like a very important figure in the history of Iran, as well as, he was later removed from power in a coup conducted by the British MI6 and the American CIA, which leads into a very, very complicated discussion about the influences that the U.S. has around the world. And I commonly make the joke that the United States is actually the world's Karen. And if anybody doesn't know what a Karen is, you can look it up in the Urban Dictionary, but it's essentially a middle-aged woman that makes solutions to others' problems an inconvenience to her, though she isn't remotely affected. Personally, I'm not a fan of that definition because I think it can be a little bit confusing. I would say that a Karen is someone that goes around getting into other people's business even though she has nothing to do with it. And a classic example of that is when this crazy lady ended up calling the police on a little girl for selling water without a permit. And so she obviously got into someone else's business, had absolutely nothing to do with it, and it didn't matter. She called the police on a little kid. So, that could be a topic for a different episode in regard to the United States being the world's Karen. 1952, Queen Elizabeth II, as I mentioned earlier, she became the Queen of England. But it just so happened that in 1952, that was what it was. That's a separate thing from earlier when her uncle gave up the crown for her dad to take over. Then she was able to take over in 1952 after he passed away. In 1954, John Foster Dulles, he created the South Asia Treaty Organization in an attempt to suppress communism from spreading. He also played a role in the coup in Iran that I mentioned a minute ago while he was serving as Secretary of State. 1955, Harlow Curtis, I think that's the pronunciation. He was the head of GM when they were the first company to ever earn $1 billion in a single year. 1956, the Hungarian freedom fighters. They were selected because they were fighting in an effort to gain independence from the Soviet Union. 1957, Nikita Khrushchev, he became the leader of the Soviet Union, in which they launched Sputnik, which was the first satellite to enter the Earth's orbit, and that essentially began the space race. He is also responsible for the de-Stalinization of Russia. 1959, Dwight D. Eisenhower selected for being elected president. 1960, American scientist. 1961, John F. Kennedy became president in 1961. And he had ordered the Bay of Pigs invasion. 1962, Pope John XXIII, I think it was, he helped solve the Cuban Missile Crisis peacefully. 1963 was Martin Luther King Jr., and realistically, I think that this selection speaks for itself. In 1963, he delivered his I Have a Dream speech, and realistically, if anybody hasn't actually heard that speech, I urge anybody to search on YouTube, whatever it is that you use, go and actually listen to it. It's actually a very good speech. It's worth listening to. This is somebody that I think that anybody should go and look into and actually research and take a hard look at his life and the impact that he had on the United States. So go give that a listen. It's a good speech. Very, very worth the time. 1964. Lyndon B. Johnson, he became president after Kennedy was assassinated, but was elected in 1964 and got the Civil Rights Act passed. 1965, William Westmoreland, he was the commander of all the U.S. soldiers in South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. 1966, The Inheritor, which I guess that's what they called it back then. It's essentially the baby boom generation. And we're starting to really see the impacts of the baby boom generation right now with everybody retiring and using Social Security benefits, and basically how none of that stuff is going to be available for us when we actually go to retire later on in life. We're going to pay into it forever and not be able to use it. 1967, Lyndon B. Johnson was selected again. He became very unpopular during this year due to the increase in soldiers that were being sent to Vietnam. 1968, the Apollo 8 astronauts were chosen. This was the first people to orbit the moon, and this was an important milestone in working toward Apollo 11, which landed on the moon in 1969. And it's actually really cool looking at some of this stuff. So mainly looking at the photos, of these guys on the moon. And I know this is I'm talking more or less talking about 1969 here, and not necessarily the Apollo 8 astronauts, but looking at the photos of these guys standing on the moon, just to think like what it must have been like to be those guys up there, so far away from Earth. You're on the moon, you're unsure that you're even going to be able to make it back. I think it would be awesome to be up there and be able to look back and see the Earth in the way that they do. It's crazy when you walk outside and you see the moon from Earth, and you see what it looks like. It's weird to look at pictures. It's like weird / really cool to look at pictures and then put yourself on the opposite end of it. Thinking about being in that suit and standing on the moon and looking back at Earth. I think it'd be really cool to, take a nice digital camera, like a mirrorless camera or a DSLR up there and get some pretty cool pictures today. So anyway, just something to really think about, what it would be like to be those guys up there and looking back on Earth in that way. So it's crazy. 1971, Richard Nixon, he created the National Postal Service. 1972, Nixon and Henry Kissinger were selected. He was the first president to visit China, and Kissinger was the national security advisor. And Nixon was reelected in 1972. 1973, it was John Sirica. I'm not sure if that pronunciation is correct. He was the judge that ordered Nixon to turn over tapes regarding the Watergate investigation. 1974, King Faisal, he was the king of Saudi Arabia when he refused to ship oil to any Western country that supported Israel, which then ended up creating an oil crisis. 1975, American women were selected in honor of the feminists fighting for equal rights in the United States. 1976, Jimmy Carter, elected president. 1977, Anwar Sadat, he was the president of Egypt and was the first Arab leader to travel to Israel trying to improve relations between the countries. And that one is important, as well as King Faisal. That stuff is important because of all the things that are going on in the Middle East in regard to Israel and the Arab countries. So it's just something, there's reasons why these people are selected for this stuff. 1979, I guess from my research, this seemed as though it was a very controversial person. Ayatollah Khomeini, and I think I pronounced that correctly. I don't know. He led the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which overthrew the Shah of Iran, which led to the establishment of Iran as a theocracy and an Islamic state. And this is also another thing that I actually really want to look into because this is an event that changed the course of Iran. And we're really still seeing the effects of that today. So I'm definitely going to be looking that up and kind of doing some more research into that. 1980, Ronald Reagan, he was elected as a president in U.S. 1981, Lech Walesa, I think that's how you pronounce that. He established a trade union that was not controlled by the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. 1982, I think this is the first non-person that is selected. It's the computer. Obviously, it's a pretty important thing. Everyone basically has a computer in their pocket today, which is, your cell phone. 1983, Ronald Reagan and Yuri Andropov were both selected, and they were Cold War rivals. 1985, this is Deng Xiaoping, and this is actually his second time being selected. He was selected in 1978 and 1985 as Times Person of the Year, and basically what he had done is he was making changes to try and improve the Chinese economy. 1987, Mikhail Gorbachev, he established a program to try and improve the Soviet Union's economy. 1988, the Endangered Earth, and as we can see, everybody, took heed at that advice and really made changes. Obviously, I'm joking about that because I don't think really much has changed. We've probably only just gotten worse. 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev was selected again, and he made the first free elections in the Soviet Union. 1990, George H.W. Bush, he was president during the Gulf War. 1991, Ted Turner, he was selected, started CNN. 92, Bill Clinton, he was elected president of the U.S. 93, the peacemakers, it was the leaders of Palestine, Israel, and South Africa. They were trying to mend, make better relations between the countries. 94 was Pope John Paul II. He hosted an event honoring the Holocaust, which is the first time the Vatican had an event dedicated to the 6 million Jews that had died during the Holocaust. 1995, Newt Gingrich, he was picked for his role in ending the 40-year Democratic Party domination in Congress, and he was actually elected. So that was the 1994 elections that he helped with that, I guess, and then he was elected Speaker of the House in January of 95. 1996, David Ho. He was a leading researcher for AIDS, and he is actually the last person to be selected in a year where there was a presidential election without being elected president, if that makes any sense. So basically, from here on out, every year there's an election year, the person who is elected president is selected as Times Person of the Year. So obviously that factors in later. 1998, Bill Clinton and Ken Starr are selected, and Clinton was surrounded by the Monica Lewinsky controversy, and Ken Starr was the person who was assigned by Congress to do the investigation. 1999, none other than the richest man in the world currently, Jeff Bezos. So it took him 21 years to do it, I guess, but Jeff Bezos started Amazon, and, if only we had known back then. So I guess time got it right, and, They labeled Jeff Bezos as a very important figure. In 2000, George W. Bush was selected for being elected president. 2001, Rudy Giuliani, bit of a controversial figure today, but back then he was the mayor of New York during the 9/11 attacks. In 2002, it's the whistleblowers. So there's a lot going on with Enron and companies that were doing things wrong. So the whistleblowers were selected in 2002. 2003, the American soldier. It was the U.S. soldiers that were fighting the war in Iraq. 2004, George W. Bush, elected president again. 2005, the Good Samaritans. I didn't really do much research into them. It's just what it was. I think Bill Gates was in there, and Bono or somebody, some other people. 2006, you were selected, as in all of us, the year that people started actually putting things on the internet and creating content on the internet. 2007, none other than the man himself, Vladimir Putin. He helped Russia regain national pride and imposed stability to bring Russia back to the table of world power. And as we've seen over the last 13 years, he definitely has brought Russia back to a world power. 2008, Barack Obama selected for being elected president. 2009, Ben Bernanke, he was the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the financial crisis, and that's a man you could probably spend hours talking about, so I'll leave it at that. Financial crisis man. 2010, Mark Zuckerberg was selected. He was the founder of Facebook. It wasn't actually founded in 2010. It just had been growing and growing and growing. 2010 is when the movie The Social Network was released. And, as time has gone, today Facebook has 2.6 monthly active users and 1.73 daily active users. So a large portion of the world logs into Facebook every single day. 2011, the protesters. So it's the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Tea Party, and Arab Spring. 2011, 2012, Barack Obama was selected again for being elected president of the U.S. 2014, the Ebola fighters. This was selected to honor the people who fought against the spread of Ebola virus in West Africa. 2015, Angela Merkel. She is the leader of Germany, and she is honored for her leadership in the Greek debt crisis and the European migrant crisis. 2016, the man himself, Donnie T. He was selected for being elected president, and nothing remarkable about anything that he did that year. He was just the guy that was elected president. 2017, the Silence Breakers. This is the beginning of the Me Too movement. Harvey Weinstein, all that stuff. Something to definitely go look into. 2018, the Guardians of the War on Truth. These are the journalists that faced jail, prosecution, or murder for their reporting. And one of the faces of this was Jamal Khashoggi. And I think that I'm pronouncing that one correctly. I'm not sure. He was reporting on the Saudi crown prince, and he was actually captured in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, and was held there, believed to be held there for a few days and tortured, and eventually the Saudi government had admitted that he had died while inside the consulate. And that was a very controversial event because, obviously, it seemed as though the government of Saudi Arabia was trying to silence journalism. So a big deal there. 2019, Greta Thunberg was selected. She started a school strike in support of climate change. I don't really know much about her other than that she's Swedish and she speaks at climate change conferences. She doesn't really appear to have much of a solution to the climate change problem, but she is bringing attention to it, which is important. I do think that if you're going to sit there and criticize people, then you should offer some sort of a solution. With that being said, I tend to criticize our government for their out-of-control spending almost on a daily basis without offering much of a solution other than just to stop spending. But I'm also not on a world stage, so I think there is a bit of a difference there. I will give credit to her in the fact that she has pointed out the fact that older generations are totally screwing the younger generations in almost every way, from climate change to the economy. If something isn't done, then there will definitely be a lot of suffering in the future. And lastly, the selection for 2020 is, as most people know today, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, currently the, I think, president-elect right now and vice president-elect. I don't agree with this, but time has set the precedent that they choose the elected president in the year that they are elected. So given that knowledge, it makes sense to me as to why they did it. It feels as though it was, it was more of a, they kind of had to. They didn't really have much of a choice to not do it. They said, oh, let's just pick these people. This is what we do every single time, so let's go ahead and do it. In my opinion, given the choices for the other finalists, they totally picked these two people for 100% political reasons. The others that were considered were Trump, which I'm definitely not advocating for, other than the fact that he was the president during this pandemic. So there's that. Then there was the movement for racial justice, and then the other one is the frontline workers, frontline medical workers. And as I mentioned in my my last episode, I think that it should have been the frontline medical workers, but that's my opinion, and I don't work for Time or anything like that, so my opinion, means nothing. So it's what it is. Many of these people had a huge impact on the world. Much of this list is something that honestly warrants talking about for hours. Many of these people can't really be, their life's work can't really be just summarized in a paragraph. Many of these people you can talk about for a long time. And as always, I encourage everyone to do their own research and read about these people on this list. Go to Time, go to Wikipedia, and find them. Just look them up. The list is available for anybody. Just Time's Person of the Year, Time's People of the Year, and you'll find it. And do some research. And I think you'll actually probably have some fun learning a little bit about all this stuff. As much as I feel like some of these choices are, kind of like political jokes today, I do believe that many of the people on this list before the 2000s, and even some of the ones that are after the 2000s, did important things in the years that they were selected. And realistically, they did important years in the years that they weren't even selected. But you can't choose the same person every single year. There are also some people that are not included in Time's list, right? We have, case in point, this year. We have 4 different groups of people that played huge roles in what happened in 2020, and the people that got selected are Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So, there are many people that play important roles in the events that happen in each year. So Time selecting 2 people or 1 person to represent that year doesn't mean that that's the most important person of the year. That's just who they selected. Not making the list doesn't mean anything. And like I said, at this point, it's likely more political, and the selections are made, in my opinion, to make people feel good as opposed to being the major headlines of the year. I believe that Time has gotten away from its original selection criteria in selecting the person that was most influenced, that most influenced world events, for better or worse. I believe that's why they retroactively get away with and justify selecting people like Hitler and Stalin. They would never do that today. This is my opinion. I don't think Time will ever choose another controversial figure as their person of the year. That's just not today's political climate. That's why they decided, in my opinion, to pick Biden and Harris. They don't really fit the mold of most influential. In the year 2020, with the global pandemic going on, Cuomo up in New York doing daily briefings, Trump doing his briefings with the task force, Dr. Fauci coming out of nowhere to be the face of the fight against the virus. With those guys, it doesn't make sense. They were out there. They were in the media. Biden accepted the nomination and retreated to his house and didn't even campaign, barely campaigned, I should say. He released videos of ads where he couldn't even really get the speeches right. He sat on the sidelines like a parent in a Little League game yelling at the umpire about how he could have made a better call. He was essentially Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. We would have just won state if Coach had put me in. He would have unified us and stomped out the virus. But the reality is that wouldn't have happened. No one put in the position would have done a perfect job. Cuomo wrote a book about his leadership in the pandemic, and New York was the hardest hit state, and it still has the highest death numbers. No one would have been perfect. Not Joe Biden, not Barack Obama, not George Bush, not Reagan, Roosevelt, Lincoln, Madison, Grant, Truman, Adams, Washington, maybe Nixon, maybe Carter, I don't know, I'm just kidding. None of these guys, none of the presidents, none of them would have done perfect. None of them would have done a perfect job. With that being said, perfect is perfect. Not saying that they wouldn't have done better, because realistically, Trump is far, far from perfect. And many presidents probably could have done a better job. And Trump, I don't think, will go down as the worst president in history. I also don't think he's going to go down as the best president in history. But the reality is that none of these guys, you put any of them in that position, and none of them would have done it much better. I think that Time could have done a better job in their selection of the Times person / people of the year and picked the frontline health workers. In my opinion, they would be able to get away from the precedent that they've set of selecting the elected president on the election year, and it realistically would allow them the freedom of being able to have more flexibility in the future. So anyway, that whole rant's over. I'm not going to speak more on any of that. I will actually personally be conducting some more research into the Iranian coup in 1953 because it seems interesting to me, as well as the Ayatollah in Iran that happened later on in 1979, I think it was. So I will be doing some more research into that. And the best thing for me for these episodes is that I conduct this research and I find little bits of history that spark my interest. that I didn't know before. I think that it makes me a more knowledgeable person, and I hope that I didn't make any mistakes mentioning something that wasn't correct. I might have. I did my best to try to keep things as organized as I could. So I will be conducting more research and trying to get smarter on some of the people on this list, and likely actually researching more. It's years and years and years worth of history, and there's more to all of this than just what happened in the one paragraph or two paragraphs that these people get credit for in the year that they're selected as Times Person of the Year. So anyway, what are your thoughts on the selection of Biden and Harris as Times People of the Year? Did Time get it right? And am I missing something? Anyway, leave me a comment on what you think. I will be doing another episode here in a few days, and a year in review for 2020 as we close this chapter and enter into 2021. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe.